Hey everybody, and Tony here. Yeah, I know I was supposed to review Donizetti's Maria Stuarda, which starred Joyce DiDonato and was shown at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. But the thing was, the tickets were all sold out. And you wouldn't believe it, but one of the ticket ladies told me that the tickets were sold out since about 10 months ago or so. So yeah, that was kind of a bummer. But I'm gonna make it up to you since I saw A Million Ways to Die in the West, which was shown at the CineStar movie theaters at Potsdamer Platz, and give my most honest critique about this movie. The movie was directed by Seth MacFarlane, who also produced, wrote, and even starred in this movie. And his co-producers were Scott Stuber and Jason Clarke. His co-writers were Alex Sulkin and Wellesley Wild. And his co-stars were Charlize Theron, Amanda Seyfried, Neil Patrick Harris, Giovanni Ribisi, Sarah Silverman, and Liam Neeson. Now, when it comes to the works of Seth MacFarlane, I definitely have a love-hate relationship with a lot of his works. I definitely love the first 3 seasons of Family Guy since they were very creative and they were naturally very funny without being overtly offensive. And I do like American Dad, which I find very decent and quite funny as well. And I also like his 2 animated shorts. One of the shorts from Oh Yeah Cartoons being about these 3 animals, a polar bear, an alligator, and an ostrich living together. And from What a Cartoon Show, Larry and Steve. Those 2 shorts I definitely found very enjoyable and quite fun to watch. What's also worth mentioning was that Seth MacFarlane was also a co-producer and co-writer for many of the cartoons in the 1990s, specifically that of Johnny Bravo. And while I do find his earlier efforts to be very decent and quite good at best, some of his later works, like the later seasons of Family Guy, mostly from the 7th, 8th, and some of the other seasons, and certain episodes of Family Guy, were definitely the ones that I didn't really care for. And they mostly involve bad social commentary and certain things that just made me scratch my head and wonder, what the hell did I just watch? But other than that, he definitely has a lot of great enthusiasm and energy. Remember his performance of the We Saw Your Boobs song at the Academy Awards? Now that was definitely hilarious, and let's just say that this song is pretty stuck in my head. So that was definitely an aspect of Seth MacFarlane that I do enjoy. His energy, his enthusiasm and passion in the world of entertainment. When it comes to his writing, there are times that there are moments where I kind of shake my head and wonder just what the hell, especially when it comes to him trying out social commentary. When it comes to, well, the reviews that I watched of Not All Dogs Go to Heaven or Seahorse Party or something like that. Yeah, I definitely watched those reviews by Rowdy C and Mr. Enter from Animated Atrocities and Admirable Animation. 2 great reviewers, by the way. And I definitely have to say that, yeah, while I do find the first 3 seasons of Family Guy to be great and American Dad to be quite decent, I found the later seasons of Family Guy, well, nothing to really write home about, nor to even care for, to say the least. But still, Seth MacFarlane definitely has a lot of charisma and energy, as evidenced by his hosting at the Academy Awards. And he definitely is a pretty good entertainer, despite some of his material being quite controversial. So, in conclusion, Seth MacFarlane definitely is, well, pretty good at what he does, even though at times some of his works make me scratch my head in confusion, or even in that of, well, a little bit of deep-seated anger. Now, let's get on with the review of this movie in particular. So what did I think of the story? I think it's pretty decent, and what really holds the story up for me definitely has to be the random bouts of slapstick humor and the comedy that is quite well timed in this film. Of course, the story isn't really anything new or fresh, since we follow a protagonist who's basically a loser at life and who's also broken up with his girlfriend and now has to prove himself to be a man, a real man who can defend himself and who won't take crap from anybody. And along the lines, he meets a woman by the name of Anna, who unknowingly is the spouse of one outlaw by the name of Clinch, and falls in love with her, not knowing her deepest, darkest secret, all while trying to get his first love, Louise, back. So there's really nothing unique or groundbreaking about the story, but like I said earlier, what really saves the story for me definitely has to be the random bouts of physical comedy and, well, quick and witty dialogue with very sharp timing of comedy being used through dialogue left and right. And like I said, the slapstick definitely saved this movie from being boring. But there are definitely some huge flaws to the story. First of all, has to be the gross out jokes. Now, call me pretentious, but there are moments where gross out humor can be done right. Take, for example, Ren and Stimpy, Cat Dog, Rocko's Modern Life, and many others that come on the top of my head. Those are the type of shows that handle gross out humor pretty well and kind of subtly, I might add. And sure, also Cow and Chicken. Sure, they have butt jokes and a lot of gross out humor left and right. But with this movie in particular, I definitely felt that the gross out jokes kind of felt obnoxious and very jarring to the main story. Yeah, it was a huge letdown for me. Not to mention a lot of the death jokes. They were definitely quite off-putting, as I never really laughed that hard. And the dick jokes, oh my goodness, do not even remind me about those dick jokes. I was practically rolling my eyes every time I just saw a dick joke left and right. It was just that bothersome. I mean, it was really bothersome seeing a penis being shown. It was just shocking beyond belief. Yeah, what more can you expect from someone like Seth MacFarlane? Even though he does have good material, some of them kind of come off as shocking. Well, basically used for shock factor, and that's how I definitely felt. It was rather uncalled for at times. And at times, the transitioning in the story could have been a lot better. I mean, in one scene, you have someone being murdered. Well, specifically, the sheriff being murdered by one of Clinch's henchmen who was in prison. And then in the next scene, we have a dance number in a barn. And I thought to myself, just, wow. That was rather sporadic, and that was almost too uncalled for to begin with. I mean, you have something that was very gruesome in one scene, and then we're treated to something that's a lot more lighthearted and fun. Yeah, that was quite sporadic at times, and at times there have been certain ass pulls, like, well, Anna saying that she was married at 9, and all that stuff. And she basically had that big reveal in the climax of this film. And I thought to myself, well, that was definitely quite uncalled for at times. And especially in that moment when we're supposed to have a very dramatic moment where Albert was supposed to leave and Anna was supposed to ask his forgiveness and all that and tell the damn truth. But other than that, the story is quite decent, though it's nothing new. But it is mercilessly marred by a lot of gross out jokes, mainly poop jokes and dick jokes, and sometimes the transitioning could have been a lot better. But what really saved this film from becoming boring definitely has to be the random bouts of slapstick humor. And of course, the quick and witty dialogue thrown in by the characters themselves. So, yes, the story was actually pretty okay, even if there were some aspects of it that made me roll my eyes. The cinematography was handled very well. I especially really loved the locations that they shot, since this was shot in Arizona at the time. Oh, and before I forget, another thing I didn't really like about the story also had to be the discriminatory jokes. I mean, you had one scene in which it was basically a shoot the slaves game in which they're like carbon copies of like African American slaves, and it's like, well, shooting ducks and all that. That was definitely quite tasteless. So the story kind of goes a bit down for me, even though the humor at times saves it. Well, certain aspects of the humor. But I'm getting off track here. The cinematography was handled very well, and I especially really loved the locations in which they were all shot in. And at times it was rather really beautiful to look at. And the characters, well, not really anything groundbreaking or anything new, were quite likable from beginning to end. Well, some of them, for the most part. Albert is the main character of this film, and he basically starts off as a likable loser, but has a huge funk when he breaks up with his first love, Louise. And he's trying to make a man out of himself until he meets Anna, the very person that really inspires him to make more out of himself and to prove to himself that he can be a real man. So I felt that, sure, Albert's character isn't really anything new for me, because he's basically the likable loser who at times spouts a few crude jokes here and there, but other than that, he's a pretty okay character. Then we have Anna, who is definitely one of my most favorite female characters of all time, well, of this year, and is definitely the best character of this film. She definitely has a lot going for her, even if that one moment was definitely an ass pull, in which she said that she was married at 9, and I almost did not expect that. Besides, there was another ass pull in this movie, in which, well, Albert told Clinch that he is passing out because there was snake poison in the bullet given to him by the Native Americans when they, well, bludgeoned him with a stone and took him in. Yeah, that was kind of an asshole of itself, so yeah. But anyways, going to Anna, she was definitely one of the greatest characters of this film. She definitely has a lot of great moments, from her entrance, showing that, yes, she is part of Clinch's troupe, but she wants more for herself. She really wants to be free from this outlaw life and live her life as a free woman who can really appreciate life as a normal citizen without having to worry about, well, crime or anything, and without having to do many unlawful things. I definitely find her character fascinating. And her chemistry with Albert was definitely that fantastic. It was just so believable, and you actually know that these two were going to end up together. It's actually quite predictable. The many moments in which Anna and Albert have together, as opposed to Albert and Louise, you could really see a great chemistry going on between Anna and Albert, as opposed to Louise and Albert, in which it was just, oh, basically Albert likes her because she's pretty and very classy and all that, which leads me to Anna, but I'll get to her later. Excuse me, which leads me to Louise, which I'll get to later. But I really find Anna's character to be very fascinating and very likable, and she's easily the most likable character of this film. She is so up there with the likes of Floria Tosca, Minnie from Puccini's La Fanciulla del West, Revi from Black Lagoon, Faye Valentine from Cowboy Bebop, and many other great female protagonists, whether they be in animation, Western animation, Japanese anime, opera, musicals, or even that of classic theater. She's definitely so up there with a lot of strong female characters that a lot of girls should be looking up to, and a lot of guys will probably admire their butts off. So overall, I definitely felt that Anna was easily the best character of this film. Now, going to Louise, she's okay nonetheless, but she's not really anything to write home about. I mean, she's just a pretty face. Sure, she does set the tension of Albert trying to become a real man because, well, Louise needs a real man in her life, not someone who is simple-minded and is basically too much of a dreamer to live, but someone who is a lot more successful and someone who's a lot more gallant, someone who is a lot more posh and all that. But with all that aside, I didn't really find Louise's character very memorable. She was simply put there just to put some tension for Albert. And Foy, oh my gosh, this guy was very obnoxious. And even though he can be quite entertaining, I still find him quite of a dick. And yeah, remember that one scene where he was shitting his pants? Now that was a scene I did not like in this movie. It was just so gross at times. It was just so eye-rolling. But other than that, Foy was a pretty decent arch rival, but he's not really anything to write home about. I mean, he's simply put a very pompous dickhead. He simply put a very pompous dickhead. And now we get to Clinch, the main antagonist of this film, alongside his cronies. Now, Clinch definitely was someone I felt genuinely scared just by looking at him. With his threatening tone and his presence on screen, I was just rather taken aback. Of course, he was anything new. He was your typical Western villain, but he definitely had an Irish accent as well. And one thing I'd like to mention is that he's kind of put the Terminator of the 1880s. Yes, Anna knocked him out with a rock, which he was supposed to be dead since that was a very fatal blow, and he had a dandelion on his ass. Yeah, I would really say that this scene was a very gross out, very irreverent, well, Scarpia's murder scene, if you can call it that, from Tosca. But instead of Tosca throwing or plunging the knife into Scarpia's heart, we simply get Anna bludgeoning Clinch on the head with a rock and then putting a sunflower on his butt crack, which I thought was kind of gross. And he might have been presumed dead, but my goodness, he came back alive. Now, I don't know if it was like, well, we need the villain still alive type of thing. I don't know if it was just lazy storytelling, or if he's like the frickin' Terminator. But it could be a kind of combination of both because, my goodness, that blow to the head was very fatal. Probably would have caused him amnesia, or probably could have caused him his death. But, yeah. Spoiler alert. So yeah, he basically dies out of, well, some contrived plot element from the story in which he basically dies through a poison bullet, which was basically ingested with snake poison given to Albert through the Native Americans. Yeah, that was kind of something that was pulled out of its ass. But still, Clinch's character was very threatening, even though his character was not anything new for me. But he was very threatening nonetheless. And now we get to the character of, well, both of Albert's best friends. Let's see. Edward and Ruth. Now, Edward is simply put the everyday nice guy. The guy who is really, really nice and very sweet, very considerate, very kind, and very generous. But even though he's a good friend to Albert, he didn't really leave that much of an impact on me. He was simply put there just because, well, he needed, Albert needed someone who he can console with, and he basically just needed a friend to talk to. Ruth is slightly more entertaining than Edward, but even then, she's an okay character, but she's nothing really groundbreaking or anything. Sure, she's nice, and what's also quite shocking is that she works as a prostitute. Let that sink in, people. She works as a prostitute, and she has a boyfriend who is an everyday nice guy. Yeah. But their chemistry is actually pretty okay, but they were not really anything to write home about. I mean, if they were taken out of this film, nothing would change in this movie. But since that they're there, they didn't really leave so much of an impact on me. And my goodness, Albert's parents are quite the dicks, if you ask me. We see through flashbacks through that miracle drug given to Albert by the Indians, and we do see flashbacks of Albert's life. I mean, his father was verbally abusive to him, and I thought, my gosh, that's just, wow, what a dick his father was. But still, the characters overall are very enjoyable, even though there's nothing that's completely deep about them. Though still, Anna is definitely the best character of this film. The acting is very solid. Seth MacFarlane, well, where can you go wrong with Seth MacFarlane and his talents? Sure, say what you will about his controversial material, whether they be in Family Guy, and at times in American Dad, and some of his works, but I will say this, he definitely put a good amount of energy and charisma to his character. He was able to make Albert a very likable character, and his performance was solid all around. Charlize Theron is, well, excuse me, going back to Seth MacFarlane, I mean, what more can you also expect from someone who is also dubbed one of those men of 1,000 voices? He definitely can pull off someone who is quite sweet and at times quite daring later on in the story. So he's definitely great at his job, even if he's made some controversial stuff left and right, and here and there. But still, he does a pretty good job. And then we have Charlize Theron, who was really fantastic as Anna. This, I have to say, is definitely her best role as of 2014 so far. She was able to bring a type of spunk, likability, charm, beauty, and strength into this character. And my goodness, was she the best performer in this film. And then we have Amanda Seyfried, who played Louise. Well, yeah, Amanda Seyfried is Amanda Seyfried. She's really pretty to look at, and she definitely has some decent acting chops. Yes, a lot of people will remember her as Karen from Mean Girls, and also in her role as Needy from Jennifer's Body. And one of her most recent contributions as of 2012 was her character in Les Miserables, the movie version starring Russell Crowe. Here I thought she was pretty good at playing a very sweet, yet very, well, shallow type of girl. But still, she was able to do a pretty good job, even if I don't really care for Louise. Now, Neil Patrick Harris as Foy was quite enjoyable to watch because of just how over the top his sense of pomp and pretentiousness and snootiness were. It was just very enjoyable watching Neil Patrick Harris make Seth MacFarlane's character's life a living hell. It was just that fun to watch from beginning to end, even if I did not like that shit joke in the climax. Still, sure, he was definitely able to make such a huge asshole in the role of Foy, which I definitely felt that, yes, this is definitely a great portrayal of such an asshole. And then we have Liam Neeson as Clinch. Yeah, since Liam Neeson is Scottish, and a part of me wonders, why is a Scottish person in a Western? Sure, they could have hired another actor like, let's say, Clint Eastwood, or many other actors who have specialized, or excuse me, American actors who have specialized in a lot of Westerns in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Hell, they could have even hired Chuck Norris to play a villain. But even then, I definitely have to say that Liam Neeson, well, what more can you expect from Liam Neeson? He can play a lot of badasses. Here, I thought he was a complete badass. He definitely, well, plays these characters that say in front of you while simply grabbing the scruff of your neck and just says to you, "Don't mess with me, you stupid fucker. Just don't mess with me." He definitely is in his element playing these characters that have a "don't mess with me fucker" attitude. So yeah, he was truly in his element playing these type of terrible and very badass characters. Not terrible in terms of, you know, well, their character, but terrible in terms of like, oh, he commits a lot of murder at times. Well, his characters. But I also love his badass roles. Remember Taken and, what was that movie again? Yeah. That one with the plane. I almost forgot its name, but I reviewed that movie. That was called, yeah. Yeah, he was definitely in his element, playing a lot of badasses, and I really enjoyed his portrayal in this movie, even though I kind of felt that a Scottish character or a Scottish actor kind of felt a bit out of place in a Western movie. And Giovanni Ribisi, even though I don't really care for his character, he was able to portray a certain sweetness and everyday nice guy nature to Edward. Sarah Silverman, yeah, you can say whatever you want about Sarah Silverman. A lot of people say that she doesn't really have a good taste in comedy. But here, I thought she was pretty tolerable as Ruth. She was quite enjoyable to watch. And I've not really seen a lot of Sarah Silverman's stand-up comedies. But I have to say that she was able to give a pretty sweet portrayal of Ruth. And her presence on screen was actually quite enjoyable at times. Yet another character that I really liked was the snake oil salesman, who I definitely felt very, well, pleased at looking at. And he was played by Dennis Haskins. Now, Dennis Haskins playing the role of the snake oil salesman, he definitely put in a lot of charisma, energy, and such a flawless performance in such a very minute role. So overall, the acting was very stellar all around. The music is what really sold me into this film. The soundtrack is definitely worth downloading, buying, and even listening onto YouTube or other music sharing sites. The music composed by, before I forget his name, who was that? Joel McNeely was just fantastic. A lot of orchestral pieces were playing in the background, which really heightened that adventurous feel, even if it's mainly a comedy. But it was just so wonderful. It was definitely an Oscar-worthy score, and I'm sure this is probably going to be contending with a lot of, well, future nominees of the oncoming 2015 Academy Awards. So, overall, this was a pretty decent movie. What sold it for me was the rampant slapstick humor, the likable characters, even though there was nothing deep about them, the solid acting, and the very outstanding music. The only flaws for me were definitely the overuse of gross out humor, transitioning flaws, and, well, we don't really get to know that much about these characters. We don't really feel fully invested with the leading male whatsoever. And at times, there were some ass pulls left and right. But still, this is a pretty enjoyable watch if you're a fan of Seth MacFarlane. For those of you who are quite skeptical or don't really care about Seth MacFarlane's work, you could give this a try. You could definitely give this a try because it can be enjoyable at times. And I guess for those who probably don't really like Seth MacFarlane's work in general, well, you might as well stay away from it, if you please. But for those of you who like Seth MacFarlane's work, go ahead and check it out. You probably won't be disappointed. And with that, I give A Million Ways to Die in the West a 3 out of 5 stars. Sure, it's a pretty okay movie. There were some elements that could have been tweaked a little bit more, and the gross out humor could have been minimalized, but it's still a very fun, irreverent, and pretty creative film, which really shows that this is definitely the type of stuff that Seth MacFarlane is quite good at. So yes, this is pretty much a decent film. And for those of you who are Seth MacFarlane fans, go check it out. For those of you who don't really care about Seth MacFarlane's work, then, well, it's your choice, whether you can stay away from it or just check it out just because. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for my review of the very movie that a lot of people are talking about, and that's Maleficent, starring Angelina Jolie. Will it be a triumphant win, or will it be an epic fail, or will it be quite mediocre? We'll find out tomorrow. Until then, this is Antoni signing off and wishing you all a good night.